A chipped brick smashing down, blood spraying straight at the lens. Under strobing disco lights, Gaap pirouettes on 6-inch platforms, his gold-capped grin catching the flare. British cinematographer. Through a police station window, a mushroom cloud blooms, reflected in Nida's wide eyes. Music cuts, heartbeat remains. This isn't your usual episode of Black Mirror. Labeled as part of the new Red Mirror series, Demon 79 doesn't warn us about the future. It drags us back into the very real streets of 1979 Britain, where racism, political fear, and nuclear panic weren't science fiction but the daily news. The horror here doesn't come from tech gone wrong. It comes from what people have always been capable of when the system gives them permission to act on their darkest instincts. The story centers around Nida, a shy Bengali shop clerk who accidentally unleashes a demon named Gaap. He tells her she must kill 3 people in 3 days, or the world will end in flames. What follows isn't just a moral spiral, it's a constant push and pull between survival, guilt, and a strangely logical kind of justice. Every time she raises the hammer, we're forced to ask, if killing one saves millions, is it still murder? Many viewers called this episode a strange detour for the series. But if you look closer, it might just be the sharpest metaphor Black Mirror has offered yet. Beneath the supernatural, it's a story about how politeness becomes violence, how being told to play nice can twist into something monstrous. It asks a brutal question. If a broken system drives someone to commit an unthinkable act, can we really blame the person, or should we be blaming the system that built the stage? And then there's the central mystery the show refuses to solve. Is Gaap real? Or is he just Nida's rage given shape and swagger? The director and writer won't say. One hints he's a demon, the other says maybe he's not. Even the music drops clues for both theories. So in this video, we're going to do more than summarize the plot. We're going to investigate. We'll trace every symbol, decode every color choice, dissect every scene until we understand not just what happened, but why Demon 79 might be the most quietly devastating episode in Black Mirror history. Think this episode was just Brooker going off script? You'd be missing the point. Demon 79 wasn't a detour, it was a return to where Black Mirror actually started, not tech, but the raw contradictions of human nature. In fact, Charlie Brooker wrote Demon 79 first, before any other script in Season 6. He was tired of people labeling Black Mirror as just tech dystopia, so he pitched a story that was deliberately supernatural, politically charged, and dripping in 1970s horror aesthetics. To mark the shift, he even created a whole new label, Red Mirror, to make it clear, this one lives in a different narrative box. Brooker brought in co-writer Bishake Ali, known for Ms. Marvel and Sex Education. A young British Muslim woman, Ali brought lived experience to a story steeped in cultural paranoia. As she put it, we weren't making The Exorcist. We were talking about a very real fear when you see society sliding into extremism and everyone still pretending it's fine because it's wrapped in politeness. Gaap's look was directly inspired by disco icon Bobby Farrell of Boney M. The flashy Afro-glam aesthetic was Brooker's tribute to the kitschy pop culture he found unsettling as hell as a kid. Actor Papa Esidu had to dance in 6-inch platform boots and sequin deep verses. At one point, he hit his head on a lighting rig mid-wire stunt, halting production for several hours. Another production twist? When the writers first developed the script, Gaap's reality was left intentionally ambiguous. The apocalypse visions were meant to be symbolic, interpretable as either real or purely in Nida's head. But during post-production, director Toby Haynes made a bold call. He added an actual mushroom cloud outside the window. That single VFX shot effectively confirmed Gaap was real, sparking tension in the writer's room. That ambiguity, or rather its deliberate rupture, is what makes this episode linger. As Haynes himself put it, I didn't want people to feel comfortable. I wanted them to be laughing and then suddenly think, wait, what if this actually happened? Demon 79 doesn't rely on jump scares or cheap horror tricks. Its real unease comes from how quietly it frames violence, not as spectacle, but as a symptom. Every shot carries the weight of something unsaid, something repressed for far too long. Director Toby Haynes, working with cinematographer James Friend, known for 1917, constructs a world that feels like a haunted photograph, part throwback horror, part political realism. Visually, Nida is rarely just in the frame, she's trapped inside it. Doors, window panes, shop fronts, subway rails, and mirrors are all used to box her in. She moves through her day like a ghost held inside a glass cage. After the killing of Keith, there's a moment when the camera pulls back and shows her descending a stairwell. The iron handrails form the shape of a crucifix. She's not just running, she's being sanctified, framed as someone who must suffer to earn the right to act. By contrast, Gaap seems to break into reality. He doesn't walk through doors, he emerges from radios, from light, from dreams. He isn't bound by rules, so the camera treats him differently. His scenes move faster, lighting flickers, focus slides from sharp to soft and back again. It's not chaos for the sake of style. It's a visual cue that something disruptive, maybe even liberating, has entered the story. The color palette leans heavily into washed-out reds, mustard yellows, and dusty browns. It looks like a worn-out documentary reel, not a polished Netflix production. But that's the point. 1979 wasn't glossy. It was paranoid and burnt out. Racial tension was boiling. The National Front marched openly in the streets. Everything about the visuals says, this was never just history, it's still happening. One of the most quietly unsettling scenes takes place at Michael Smart's campaign rally. He delivers his speech in front of a giant Union Jack, backlit with stark red and blue lighting. The flag, caught in the subwoofer's vibration, seems to shiver. It doesn't feel patriotic. It feels like it's liquefying, like the whole country is melting into something dangerous. That visual, a shaking flag beneath a smiling man, says more about fascism than any monologue could. Nida's character arc is not about corruption. It's about recognition. She doesn't become a killer because she loses her mind. She becomes one because the world around her has already lost its soul. At the beginning, she's quiet, polite, invisible. By the end, she's decisive. Not cruel. Just awake. The hammer isn't just a weapon. It's a voice she wasn't allowed to use before. Gaap's role isn't to tempt her. It's to ask, are you willing to stop pretending this is normal? He never kills. He never forces. He only reveals what's already there. When Nida refuses the final sacrifice, he doesn't punish her. He offers to stand beside her, even if it means eternal exile. That's not a demon. That's a witness. And yet the most surprising moment comes at the end. After Nida makes her final choice, the apocalypse happens. But it doesn't look like hell. It looks like release. The world ends, and a soft 70s ballad plays. Bright Eyes by Art Garfunkel, a song about death, written for a children's film about rabbits, fills the silence. It turns what should be horror into something strangely hopeful. Not triumph, but peace. The props and symbols deepen that ambiguity. The talisman Nida finds in the basement is carved with a forked symbol, identical to the one used in Bandersnatch, White Bear, and Playtest. It's a glyph that has always signaled false choice, manufactured destiny, the illusion of control. Here it connects Nida to a legacy she never chose, the trauma of migration, the violence of assimilation, and the quiet rage passed down through generations. The 3 lives in 3 days demand isn't just a plot device, it's a theological reversal. In Christian myth, 3 days marks resurrection. Here it marks unraveling. Nida isn't being tested by God. She's being judged by a world that doesn't care if she lives or dies. And so she flips the script. She accepts the curse. Not to survive, but to walk away from a world that never wanted her in the first place. What makes this story hit hardest isn't the blood. It's the quiet understanding that builds between 2 outcasts, a woman no one listens to, and a demon no one trusts. When they hold hands and vanish into oblivion, it doesn't feel like defeat. It feels somehow like justice. What makes Demon 7/9 more than just a clever one-off is how deliberately it toys with structure. On the surface, the story unfolds in a straightforward 3-day countdown. But under the hood, the pacing and rhythm play a psychological game. Each day becomes its own moral crucible, not just for Nida, but for us. The series doesn't ask if she'll kill. It asks what kind of death the viewer is willing to accept. The narrative isn't linear in emotion, even if it is in time. Day 1 builds with surrealism and disbelief. Day 2 tilts into frenzy and dark comedy. Day 3 becomes eerily quiet, almost tender. The closer we get to Armageddon, the less frantic the world becomes. It's as if the show is whispering, maybe destruction isn't what's terrifying, it's how calmly the world ignores the signs. This tonal calibration is signature Charlie Brooker. From Shut Up and Dance to White Bear, his best episodes don't scream, they escalate. They lure you in with something absurd, maybe even funny, and then slowly turn the lights down. But here, he flips even that. Demon 79 starts in dread and ends in a kind of musical, glittery serenity. That reversal of dread into grace is rare, not just in Black Mirror, but in modern television as a whole. Director Toby Haynes plays a huge role in that tonal transition. Known for his work on Doctor Who, Sherlock, and Andor, Haynes is no stranger to weaving genre tropes into character studies. He treats the horror not as a genre element, but as an emotional register. Nida's fear isn't visual, it's embodied. We see it in how her posture changes from scene to scene, how the frame shifts to let her breathe or cage her in. The camera is less a window and more a mood ring. The use of split genres is also noteworthy. At different points, Demon 79 flirts with slasher aesthetics, political satire, absurdist comedy, and cosmic horror, but never commits fully to any of them. This ambiguity allows it to remain emotionally fluid. A lesser show would have leaned hard into horror tropes. Here, horror is a shadow that moves around the edges, not the monster in the center. This hybridization has sparked sharp debate in critical circles. Some reviewers dismiss the episode as off-brand, arguing it lacked the technological critique that defines Black Mirror. But others have defended it as a bold reframing, pointing out that Brooker was never really writing about technology, but about power. And here, power doesn't come from an app or a device. It comes from history, ideology, and silence. Academic takes on the episode vary dramatically. Some view it as a feminist narrative about reclaiming agency through moral violence. Others argue that it's dangerously ambiguous, potentially justifying vigilantism. There's even a school of thought that suggests the episode is a sly metacritique of the Black Mirror fandom itself, an audience that has become so obsessed with clever twists and gadget parables that they forget the show's core question. What does it cost to stay human in an inhuman world? That cost is laid bare in the structure itself. Each of Nida's 3 days doesn't just escalate her decisions, it reframes them. The first kill is framed as a horror. The second is framed as confusion. The third never happens. Structurally, this is Subversion at its sharpest. You expect a third act crescendo, a bloodbath, or a betrayal. But the series swerves into stillness. The refusal to complete the arc is itself a narrative act. Nida walks away from the script the world handed her, and into one of her own making. That choice complicates how we judge her. She isn't redeemed because she doesn't want redemption. She doesn't win because winning was never the point. Her arc ends not with clarity, but with coexistence, with the demon, with her guilt, with the end of everything. That ending is less about resolution and more about honesty. You could call it nihilism, but that would miss the point. Demon 79 isn't cynical. It's resigned. Not to fate, but to reality. The world doesn't always offer clean conclusions. Sometimes the bomb drops. Sometimes the demon is real. Sometimes the worst part isn't what we become. It's that we waited so long to become anything at all. That's what lingers after the credits roll. Not the fire, not the hammer, but the silence that follows. A woman finally heard only when the world has stopped listening. At the heart of Demon 79 lies a simple question that becomes increasingly unbearable. What does it take for a good person to break? The episode doesn't answer that question with philosophy or law. It answers it with brick, blood, and silence. And that's precisely what makes it so political, not because it picks a side, but because it forces us to confront the systems that demand obedience in the first place. This isn't just the story of a woman who kills. It's the story of the machine that made her think it was the only way out. The root of the conflict isn't supernatural. It's structural. Nida lives in a world where the rules are designed to break her slowly. She's polite in a culture that ignores her, diligent in a workplace that condescends to her, silent in a community that sees her as alien. Every social interaction is a soft noose. Every look a dismissal. She doesn't snap because she's unstable. She snaps because everything around her is gaslighting her into paralysis. That's why Gaap's arrival feels less like possession and more like emancipation. He doesn't curse her, he notices her. He sees what no one else in her world does, that Nida's survival depends on doing something, anything, even if that means embracing something terrible. In a warped way, he's the only character who tells her the truth. Which brings us to the show's most uncomfortable truth. Violence in Demon 79 isn't gratuitous. It's logical. The hammer, the killings, a choice to burn it all down. They're not deranged actions. They're systemic reactions. In this story, the supernatural is just the excuse the world needs to keep pretending it's innocent. The political dimension is woven deep. Set in 1979, the episode takes place on the eve of Margaret Thatcher's rise to power during a moment when Britain's far-right nationalist movements were gaining momentum. The villain, Michael Smart, is not a cartoon. He is disturbingly plausible, a populist wrapped in manners. His rhetoric is cloaked in civility, his xenophobia articulated through reasonable concerns. It's dog-whistle politics at its most insidious, and the show makes it clear, monsters don't always snarl. Sometimes they smile and ask for your vote. The 3-day countdown functions as more than a narrative device. It mirrors the psychological structure of resistance. Day 1 is disbelief. Surely this can't be happening. Day 2 is doubt. Maybe it's true, but there must be another way. Day 3 is decision. No one's coming to help, so now it's on you. Nida moves through these stages not as a hero or anti-hero, but as someone waking up from a coma of cultural gaslighting. That's also why the show avoids easy redemption. Nida doesn't become good or turn bad. She simply begins to live, without apology. In that sense, the most radical part of Demon 79 isn't the apocalypse, it's her refusal to seek forgiveness. There's a moment just before the clock strikes midnight where she could back down, could apologize, could beg for understanding. Instead, she chooses clarity. That's terrifying, not because it's evil, but because it's free. In many ways, Nida's arc echoes historical patterns. Societies built on exclusion often breed violent resistance, not because resistance is inevitable, but because inclusion was never really offered. The episode doesn't glorify violence, but it does make a case for why people stop asking nicely. There's a long tradition of fiction that uses demons to represent suppressed rage. Here, the demon doesn't tempt her toward sin. He holds a mirror to a world already soaked in it. Even the ending, where Nida and Gaap walk hand in hand into nothingness, is symbolic of how often people of color, immigrants, or anyone labeled other are forced to choose between assimilation and erasure. Nida doesn't pick martyrdom. She picks exit. And the fact that the exit is styled with glitter, gospel light, and a quiet ballad only makes it more haunting. It's not suicide. It's release. And what does it say that her most honest moment comes only after the world ends? That final choice, to walk into oblivion with the only person who saw her, raises the episode's most existential question. What if justice isn't real, but solidarity is? What if liberation doesn't look like a courtroom or a protest, but like leaving the story entirely? This is where Demon 79 becomes more than a fable. It becomes a test. It asks us if we're willing to sit with a character who chooses destruction over endurance, and still believe she's not a villain. It demands that we separate morality from obedience, justice from law, survival from goodness. And in doing so, it reveals something that most television fears to admit. Sometimes the system is so broken, the most human thing you can do is walk away from it. What makes Demon 79 truly unsettling isn't just the idea of the world ending, it's how reasonable the world looks on the way down. The story isn't about evil in the traditional sense. It's about the kind of quiet, smiling decay that comes from institutions failing by design. This is not an apocalypse that blindsides anyone. It's an apocalypse that everyone lets happen, one polite excuse at a time. That's the real horror. The episode doesn't aim its sharpest critique at Nida. It turns its gaze toward the audience, asking, who really caused the tragedy here? Was it the woman with the hammer, or the people who forced her to carry it in the first place? Her manager who passive-aggressively bullies her? Her co-worker who mocks her food and accent? The police who dismiss her panic as delusion? The media that gives Michael Smart airtime in the name of balance? Demon 79 shows us a chain of micro-complicities, small acts of cruelty and cowardice that together form the architecture of injustice. And what about Michael Smart himself? He's never overtly violent. He doesn't incite riots. He doesn't raise his voice. What he offers is something far more dangerous, plausible deniability. Every word in his speech is legally clean and morally filthy. He builds platforms out of euphemisms and soundbites. Civilized values. Border security. Restoring pride. These aren't just slogans, they're escape hatches for people who want to support bigotry without feeling like bigots. This is where the episode's social critique cuts deepest. It's not about right versus left. It's about how power sanitizes itself. How language becomes a disinfectant. The episode dares to say what most public discourse won't, that politeness can be a weapon. That the most dangerous ideologies don't wear swastikas, they wear suits. And so we return to the question of responsibility. Who should be held accountable when a society produces monsters by making everyone else feel comfortable? When children are abused but neighbors didn't want to get involved? When political leaders echo white nationalist talking points in the tone of customer service reps? The episode doesn't hand us a villain. It hands us a mirror. That mirror reflects an uncomfortable truth. In Demon 79, nobody gets punished except the person who refuses to play along. Let's talk about moral boundaries. Most shows draw them clearly. This is right. That is wrong. But Demon 79 throws that playbook away. It forces us to sit with contradiction. Nida's actions are violent, but they're also deeply human. She's not righteous. She's not sadistic. She's desperate. And desperation, when cornered by structural injustice, doesn't follow tidy rules. The show doesn't let her off the hook, but it also doesn't condemn her. That ethical tension is what gives the episode its lasting power. It doesn't offer closure, it offers complexity. And in a media landscape that loves clear answers, that feels almost revolutionary. One of the most divisive scenes in the episode is the moment in the police station when Nida calmly explains the apocalypse to a room full of men who dismiss her as insane. She's lucid, articulate, clear, and yet nothing she says matters. Because she's not the right kind of voice. She's brown. She's working class. She's angry. So they laugh. And then the bomb drops. This isn't just a dramatic beat. It's a diagnosis of how often institutions confuse order with justice, control with clarity, dominance with truth. When the apocalypse comes, it doesn't roar. It glows. Through the window. Quietly. Like a truth that had been there the whole time. And yet, even here, the episode resists cynicism. Nida's final moments are not framed as madness or defeat. They're framed as choice. She walks into the void not because she wants to die, but because it's the first time she's allowed to go anywhere at all. For once, no one's stopping her. Not her boss. Not the police. Not the voice of reason. Just her. And the demon who never lied. So who do we blame? That question won't be answered by the show. And it shouldn't be. Because Demon 79 isn't a morality play. It's a pressure test. It doesn't ask if we understand Nida. It asks if we dare to. And that in itself is a kind of ethical revolution. The world Demon 79 shows us isn't science fiction. It's a memory. And maybe worse, it's a preview. Set in 1979, it plays like a period piece. But its details feel like news from this morning. Right-wing populism. Great replacement paranoia. Dog whistle politics. The way systems call themselves neutral while targeting the same people again and again. The truth isn't that Demon 79 could happen. It's that it already did. And probably still is. When Michael Smart stands at his podium, calmly assuring voters he'll bring back civilized values, you can swap his name for a dozen others across Europe and North America. The rhetoric is the same. The cadence is the same. The smile is the same. This isn't an alternate timeline. It's the same loop we've always been in. The episode's supernatural elements might seem fantastical, but even those feel eerily plausible. Gaap, the demon, doesn't bring chaos. He brings clarity. In a world that has normalized cruelty so thoroughly that the rational response is to ignore it, it takes something irrational, something metaphysical, to wake someone up. That's not a fantasy. That's just how trauma works. And let's not forget the apocalypse. The one Nida tries to stop. The one she's told is coming if no one acts. The one no one else believes in. If that sounds familiar, it should. We are living in an age of overlapping crises. Climate disaster, pandemic backlash, authoritarian creep, rising hate crimes. Each one signaled years in advance. Each one met with polite dismissal. Demon 79 captures the emotional texture of living in a society that knows disaster is coming and still chooses to do nothing. The countdown isn't fiction. It's a feeling. And yet, despite all that, the episode doesn't collapse into despair. Its most radical move is not the apocalypse. It's the fact that someone tried to stop it, even when she knew she'd be dismissed, doubted, destroyed. Nida's resistance isn't a success story. It's a moral anchor. She acts. She tries. She fails. But she's never indifferent. That commitment to doing something, even when it seems futile, is what gives Demon 79 its quiet hope. It tells us that survival isn't always about preventing collapse. Sometimes it's about refusing to let collapse go unquestioned. So what do we learn? First, that politeness isn't always virtue. In oppressive systems, manners are often a mask for violence. Second, that evil doesn't need horns. Sometimes it wears a smile and talks about community standards. And third, that moral action doesn't always look noble. Sometimes it's messy, angry, unapologetic, and still worth doing. The episode offers no blueprint for salvation, but it does suggest a warning system. Pay attention to the people no one listens to. Watch who's being told to stay calm. And when someone starts naming the truth, even if it sounds impossible, don't ask if they're crazy. Ask if maybe you're the one who's been asleep. What would a real-world response to a Demon 79-style countdown look like? Maybe it starts with listening, believing survivors, calling out coded hate speech, interrupting systems instead of explaining them away. These aren't heroic gestures. They're human ones. And when that fails, then it's about persistence, organizing, building communities that don't just resist power, but reroute it. The show doesn't tell us how to fix the world, but it insists we can no longer pretend it isn't broken. In that way, Demon 79 isn't a warning. It's a rehearsal. A dress rehearsal for a society where justice isn't granted from above, but pulled from the margins, claimed by those who have nothing else to lose. And here's the twist. Even after the bomb drops, there's a kind of hope. Not in survival, but in witness. Nida walks into the void with someone who saw her. And that, more than anything, is what we keep losing in the real world. The ability to be seen, not as data points or demographics, but as people whose anger comes from love, whose desperation comes from refusal, and whose strength comes from choosing dignity over obedience. That's not just a story. That's a call. For a story wrapped in murder and myth, Demon 79 has sparked an oddly warm afterlife. Viewers didn't just watch it, they absorbed it. The internet lit up with memes, deep dives, even cosplay tributes to Gaap's glittering disco look. But beneath the surface-level jokes, he's just a funky little guy with apocalypse anxiety, lies something more durable. The episode has become a cultural mirror, not just for Britain's past, but for the moral crisis of now. The fork talisman, the so-called choice symbol, has been turned into an emoji shorthand for impossible decisions. Gaap is real, trended on Reddit as a meme, then returned as a serious discussion thread on mental health and inner voices. Some even began referring to their intrusive thoughts as my personal Gaap, a sardonic but poignant way of making sense of buried rage. Academics have taken note too. Within a year of release, the episode had inspired no fewer than 5 university seminars on moral ambivalence in media. Scholars debated whether Nida's actions constituted revolutionary justice or psychological collapse. Others compared Demon 79 to Greek tragedy, where fate and choice collapse into one another and leave only the question, what does it mean to act when you're already condemned? If the episode leaves you feeling exposed, like someone has quietly mapped your fear, your anger, your fatigue, there's good news. This conversation has been happening across film and literature for decades. And there are other works worth seeking out if you want to keep pulling that thread. Film recommendations. The Killing of a Sacred Deer, 2017. Yorgos Lanthimos' icy parable about moral debt and sacrifice, wrapped in surgical dread. Like Demon 79, it dares to ask, what price must be paid for an inherited wrong? La Haine, 1995, a brutal, poetic snapshot of 3 marginalized youths in post-riot Paris. The tension builds like a ticking bomb. So far, so good, so far, so good, until reality crashes in. Funny Games, 1997/2007, Michael Hanke's meta-horror on audience complicity, where the violence is less terrifying than the spectatorship. A direct challenge to how we consume suffering. Camille Claudel, 1915-2013, a quietly devastating portrait of a woman institutionalized by a system that calls her madness inconvenience. Watch for the silence, it roars. Book recommendations. The Wretched of the Earth by Franz Fanon, a raw, urgent philosophical treatise on colonial trauma and the psychology of resistance. The book's insight into violence as both destruction and rebirth pairs powerfully with Nida's arc. Night by Elie Wiesel, a survivor's memoir that wrestles with faith, silence, and witnessing horror. It's not about answers, it's about remembering who we are when the world stops making sense. We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson, a gothic novella about isolation, female rage, and the power of rewriting your own mythology when society labels you a monster. The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. Le Guin, a masterwork in empathy and alienation. While more sci-fi in tone, its exploration of social norms and moral paradox feels spiritually adjacent to Demon 79's core dilemmas. What if the demon was right? It's tempting when the screen fades to black and the credits begin to roll, to sigh and say, well, it's just fiction. That's the reflex we're trained to have, to tuck a story away the moment it unsettles us. But Demon 79 doesn't let you do that. It doesn't offer catharsis. It doesn't give you permission to look away. Instead, it leaves you sitting with something raw. Not fear, not guilt, but a deep, unplaceable recognition. Something in this story isn't made up. Something here is real. And if you listen closely, you'll hear an echo. Not from another show, not from another Black Mirror episode, but from the pages of Fanon's The Wretched of the Earth. Let's start with a simple, devastating line from Fanon. The colonized man finds his freedom in and through violence. That sentence has haunted generations of readers. Not because it celebrates violence, but because it dares to explain it. Because it forces you to ask not whether violence is moral, but why it becomes necessary. That is precisely the question Demon 79 refuses to let go of. Nida's arc is not one of corruption. It is one of collision between a woman who has tried every polite form of survival and a system that punishes her for existing. Fanon understood that kind of system. He lived it. Born in Martinique, trained in France, Fanon became a psychiatrist in colonized Algeria. He witnessed what happens when oppression becomes internalized, when the body absorbs the lie that it is meant to serve. And he knew that eventually something breaks, not quietly but violently. That's Nida's story. She isn't radicalized by ideology. She isn't seduced by power. She is cornered by circumstances so tightly wound that the only movement left is to swing. Not out of hatred, out of breathlessness, out of the exhaustion of being ignored. Fanon would have seen in her not a murderer, but a case study in what he called reactive pathology. A woman who has gone through all the proper channels, work, civility, assimilation, and discovered they were never doors, only walls. When Gaap appears, he doesn't infect her. He activates her. He offers what Fanon called the clarity of revolt, the sudden, terrifying understanding that the only moral act in a rigged system is to reject it entirely. But let's be honest, that's a dangerous idea. And that's why Demon 79 is dangerous. Because it doesn't allow you to dismiss Nida as mad or possessed. It forces you to consider that maybe she is the sanest person in the story. Maybe the demon wasn't a corrupter. Maybe he was a liberator. And maybe the world needed to burn. Fanon warned that colonial systems gaslight the colonized into believing their rage is irrational. That the call for equality must always be polite, always be gradual, always be willing to wait. But history shows us that power never gives itself away freely. That freedom, when denied, eventually demands something in return. Decolonization, Fanon writes, is always a violent event. That's what makes Demon 79 so uniquely haunting. It takes place not in a colony, but in the metropole. Not on the edge of empire, but in its heart. And yet, the logic remains the same. Nida may live in Britain, but she is treated as if she exists on borrowed space. Her politeness is a defense mechanism. Her compliance is armor. Her silence is mistaken for peace. But silence is not peace. It's pressure. And pressure always explodes. The brilliance of the episode is that it doesn't position Nida's rage as exotic or extreme. It shows it as ordinary, as earned. That's the real horror, not that she could kill, but that we understand why she does. And that's where Fanon's ideas become even more provocative. He didn't just analyze rage. He respected it. He wrote that the colonized man liberates himself in killing the colonizer. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, literally. Fanon believed that violence could cleanse, not because it solves everything, but because it restores agency. Because in a world where the oppressed are told to endure, to forgive, to assimilate, the act of saying no more is itself revolutionary. Nida's hammer, then, becomes a sacred object, not of destruction, but of authorship. For the first time, she writes the script. Not smart, not the police, not the society that wants her invisible. Her. But Fanon also warns us. He knew that violence, while clarifying, does not heal. It wounds both ways. It burns the old world, yes, but it leaves scars on the new one too. That's why Nida never becomes triumphant. She doesn't revel in her power. She doesn't crave blood. She just stops apologizing. That too is a kind of revolution, the quiet refusal to keep begging for a seat at a table that was never meant to include you. So what are we supposed to do with this story? Are we meant to cheer for Nida? To grieve for her? To fear her? The answer is all of it, because the show isn't asking for agreement. It's asking for understanding. It's asking if we're willing to sit with discomfort. If we're willing to believe that sometimes survival is not clean. Sometimes justice is not soft. Sometimes the person holding the hammer is the only one seeing the truth clearly. That's the lesson Demon 79 inherits from Fanon, that evil isn't always where you expect it. That sometimes the demon is the only one telling the truth. And what about the apocalypse? Here's where the show does something devastating. It proves Nida right. The bomb drops. The world ends. She was trying to save people who never even looked at her. She was willing to die for them. And they laughed. Dismissed her. Called her crazy. Until the sky burned. That's the most Fanonian moment of all. The realization that a society built on denial will always meet truth with mockery, right up until the point it's too late. And then it will blame the person who tried to warn them. So what now? That's the question the show leaves us with. That Fanon leaves us with. That history leaves us with. What happens when politeness fails? When law fails? When institutions not only refuse to protect, but actively erase? Do we wait? Do we pray? Or do we pick up the hammer? It's not a comfortable question. It's not supposed to be. But it is the right one. And maybe that's the true purpose of stories like Demon 79. Not to guide, not to instruct, but to ask the one thing that civilization always fears most. What if the demon was never the threat? What if the real threat was believing you could survive without becoming one? What if, as Fanon might say, we have mistaken the silence of the oppressed for peace, when all along it was the sound of something ancient gathering strength? Something with teeth. Something with memory. Something ready. Let's break the fourth wall. If you were Nida, and the world didn't believe you, would you pick up the hammer? Or would you walk away? Drop your answer in the comments. But no justification. Just choose. Take the hammer or walk out the door.